Good morning, everyone. I want to start with an apology and a thank you. So the apology is, while this is a wonderful place to live, it's not a wonderful place to drive. And so things happen occasionally that you don't have control over. Having said that, that of course means I need to be more than remarkable to make up for being late, and that's a tough game. I don't know that I can do that. Second, a thank you. I want to say thank you to all of you for the incredible work that you do in the communities that you serve. I think many times in the independent sector, the nonprofit sector, people take just for granted that there are people like you out doing really incredible work in the community, or you may be doing it in a shadow, creating some really important outcomes that people don't know belong to you. And so I just want to say thank you for your leadership and the work that you do in your communities. Now, Lynette is an incredible partner in this community. The work that she and her organization does links across a number of missions here and creates really a process of activity that's critical to the building of the sector and critical to the livability of the community. And that's kind of where I want to start this morning, because there are several trends in the sector you should be aware of. I want to take you back to high school just for a minute and give you a quick introduction to civics that I'm not sure many high school students are getting today, but you probably all got it. It might have passed you by at the moment that it happened. But we live in a democratic capitalist society, and democratic capitalist societies are essentially made up of three economic sectors that are critical to make them work. Now, most of the people that you work with and a lot of the people in your families don't really ever think about this and may not even know what I'm about to share with you. But a democratic capitalist society requires a private sector. The private sector would be business in this case, and it requires that sector because the private sector generates wealth. You can't have a capitalist society if there's no wealth. Now, we can argue all day about how wealth transfers and whether or not it's accessible to everybody it should be. That's a different set of issues. At some point, someone's got to create wealth, otherwise you don't have a capitalist society. So the private sector, in its nature, wants to go out and make all the money it possibly can for its owners and its employees, and they'd really much prefer if everyone else just stayed out of their way, if there was no regulation, nobody to look over their shoulder, just get out of the way and let us get rich, right? The second sector of the three-sector economy is the public sector, also known as the government. Now, whichever side of the political fence you're on, it doesn't really matter. The reality is that that sector's job is to create infrastructure and security for the people who live within the structure. The preamble to the Constitution is pretty clear that security doesn't just mean protecting the borders, it means safety in the form of things like housing, food, security. In other words, can we create infrastructures within America in which people are secure as citizens of the country? Now, you all know the economic battle that goes on between the public and the private sector, right? Private sector wants to make all the money they can and pay no taxes. The public sector wants the private sector to pay more taxes so it has money to work with. Thus, we have a third sector, which I would add is called the independent sector. Most of you probably don't call it that, but economists call it that. The independent sector is full of nonprofits. Nonprofits, of course, that's not really a description. And I would suggest that you never introduce yourself as a nonprofit leader or being part of a nonprofit organization, because as you look at generational cohorts, the younger generational cohorts don't really understand this three-sector strategy, and they think the fact that you're a nonprofit is too bad for you. I'm sorry to hear that. You're nonprofit? I'm sorry, right? Where older people would look at you and say, okay, that's great. So you're coming to the table in a democratic capitalist society in order to do good work without profit as part of your scenario. That, to them, that's a big positive thing. But to younger people, it kind of sounds like you're a loser. You know, I'm just sorry you can't make this work out very well. Now look, these three sectors interact with each other constantly, but they all have roles that you need to be aware of in the work against your mission. The first one is that the public sector and the private sector negotiate constantly over that tax thing, right? So if I'm in economic development for a public sector entity and I want your company to move here and bring employees, what am I going to offer you? A tax break, right. Doesn't matter to me that all those employees you bring have to drive on the roads and they're going to have to go to schools and they're going to have to be in the way every time I try to get to a place like this in the morning. Doesn't matter. I'm still going to offer you a tax break because there's no need for you to pay if you'll just come here. The private sector, on the other hand, knows that the public sector will do these things, and so they negotiate constantly around financing strategies that include tax breaks or breaks for things they may do later. At the end of the day, the independent sector, the sector we all reside in, is the sector of innovation and creativity. We're the people that the other two sectors look to do what they can't do or won't do. Let me say that again. They look to this sector to do what they can't do or won't do. And so we can have arguments all the time. You can spend time in your state capital, or you can spend time in Washington arguing about the fact that the public sector isn't funding the work you do enough. And those arguments sometimes pay off. But ultimately, that sector looks to you to be the entity that is the kind of vendor, the worker, right? So many of the things in the Constitution that the public sector is responsible for, they don't actually do. They fund you to do it. And so you're kind of the shadow sector of the public sector. Now, I say that to you because when these three sectors don't work together, there's a problem. As a shadow sector, you sometimes get delegated things in your community that nobody else knows how to do, wants to do, cares to do, has money to do. They go, I don't know, isn't that your job? Shouldn't you be doing that? We did a study here in 2015 as the foundation launched one of the country's largest renovations of housing structures, where we moved to permanent supportive housing by taking all of the nonprofits that do that work and funding them in a new way to get that work done, and then replacing that platform at a space where the public sector could fund it. And so we started with a lot of survey work, and we talked to people in the community to figure out, who do you think's responsibility it is to deal with a homeless problem? Who do you suppose they thought the homeless problem belonged to? Anybody have an idea? They thought it belonged to the church, right? Religious institutions should be dealing with this. They should be fixing it, and we shouldn't be spending money on this at all. This should be a problem for religious and faith institutions to deal with. Now, this will tell you three things. Number one, it'll tell you that older Americans remember a time when we depended on the religious sector to do many things they can't do today. Number two, it might remind you how disconnected the citizens of your community are from the livability of your community. And number three, it might also be just a problem of consequence. The problem is so big that when you force me to think about who should be owning this problem, I don't want to own it because I can't figure it out. I don't know anyone who's big enough to own it. So it seems like a religious institution should own it. That sounds good to me. So it could be as simple as just, I don't have the faintest idea, and I can't describe the problem or understand the problem, and so I'm going to give it to these folks. Now, look, I tell you all of that because if you're in the innovation and creativity space in your mission direction, then your job is to figure out how to find solutions to complex social problems. And that goes beyond process, right? So we all know process. We know that hungry people need to be fed. But feeding hungry people doesn't actually solve the hunger problem. In fact, in some cases, it might make it worse. Because if we spend all the money we have feeding hungry people, when we're all out of money, there'll still be a line of hungry people that we haven't fed yet because we haven't done anything about the issue that caused hunger. And so the independent sector is the most innovative of the three sectors in many ways because we have to figure out how to get to source problems of complex social issues that other people not only aren't thinking about, but when you ask them in a survey, they go, oh, let's make it their problem, just so it's not my problem. So in a democratic capitalist society, what we want are people to vote, engage, and give. because that's part of what makes this sector work as part of the three-sector strategy. But it also means that in your world, when you go out thinking about how you build community structures, you don't leave the other two sectors out. It means not just talking to government when you want money, not just talking to foundations when you want money, not just talking to the private sector when you think maybe they'll sponsor something, but bringing them around the table to solve the problem, to figure out what needs to be done. At the foundation, we refer to philanthropy as an exercise of head, heart, and wallet, all three. And the reason for that, you all know very well. If all you have is a wallet, I can't trust you, right? You'll give once, twice, maybe never again. And I won't know why you gave, and I won't know why you're not giving now. If all you have is a head, you're likely to be a critic of everything we do, because you'll constantly be thinking about why we're doing it and the fact that we're probably doing it wrong. If all you have is a heart, then I have to continually spend money to generate pictures of people that don't look good so that I can continue to get to your heart, right? And so if you come to the table with a head, a heart, and a wallet, then you're the person in a democratic capitalist society I want at the table. Because you can think, you actually have a sense of being for why this is a problem that you need to be a part of solving, and you brought your wallet with you to the table. When you've got all three of those, you've got leaders in a community that can make a difference. And so many times our job is to convene those leaders. And I don't mean that in the old sense of, oh, let's throw a meeting and feed some folks and see who shows up. I mean bringing them around tables to solve the problems that you're dealing with every day. Challenge them to come to the table and work with you in that space. We see in communities around America burgeoning entrepreneurial sectors where you have lots of early stage and startup companies with really smart entrepreneurs who are doing amazing things using business strategy to get them done. Well, why wouldn't those people be at your table? Why wouldn't they come to talk to you about what business sense they may bring to solve for something you're trying to correct in the space you're working in? So the issue is not all the people who are not paying attention. The issue is ours. Our ability to make the circle bigger and not smaller. Our ability not to just talk to people who are willing to come talk to us, but to engage people to get better. If I took you back 150 years to what was the nonprofit sector then, it was a much different sector. It was mostly a sector full of associations. And so in a community, you might come to a meeting that we're all at where we're talking about some things that are bothering us here. We've got some problems in this community we need to solve. And you would bring your opinions, and you would offer to participate and be a part of that. And then at the end of the meeting, you'd reach into your pocket and you'd throw a few dollars on the table. That's how the sector got started. Today, we're much more professional. We tend to talk to only rich people and institutions that have all kinds of strategies to make grants that usually result in a lot of paperwork, time, and effort that don't result in you getting anything. And then in addition to that, we've got a lot of people who are constantly complaining about the problems we're working on, and they don't always recognize that we're actually making some progress here. And for some reason, it's our fault. But what's our fault is our ability to communicate the outcomes we're driving. So y'all may know this, in the funding world, we actually measure three different things in our relationships with people doing work in communities. We measure their outputs, right? How many people are you serving? How much does it cost to do that? Are you serving more this year than you did last year? That is primarily a worthless measure. The only reason we measure it is for efficiency. It's for efficiency. The second measure we look at is outcomes. So I don't care how many people you served last year, how are those people different now than they were before you served them? How are their lives better? Have you changed their trajectory or moved them to a space where they're more successful than they were before? That's an outcome. Outputs are efficiency. Glad you're serving a lot of people at a low cost. But I really don't care how much it costs you to serve people. What I care is how are they different? Because that's the thing that attracts capital to you. And then the third measure is highly misunderstood. People say this to you all the time. I'm sure you've been in meetings with funders and others who say to you, Well, tell me about the impact my grant is going to have when I give it to you. I want to know what the impact is, because we only give grants for impact here, right? Well, the next time a funder asks you that question, you should politely but strongly say to them, your grant will have no impact. Your grant will create outcomes that will drive long-range impact. So here's the academic answer that most people don't know. The measure of impact is done using regression data over 10 years. So if you've been doing what you're doing for 10 years, and I can apply regression data to look back over those 10 years, I can measure your impact in the community. But you're never going to have an impact with one grant. You're going to have outcomes that matter. And so if you'll drive people to invest in you for the outcomes you generate, you'll stop some of the discussion about how much the outcomes cost. People always say to me, well, I don't know, these outcomes look pretty expensive to me. Like, whose judgment is that? So if it costs $10,000 a kid to change the life of a child, does that mean we shouldn't make the investment because it's too expensive? It means if we measure the outcome, we would know whether or not it was worth $10,000 to do that. And that's your discussion point with investors in your community. Get them away from outputs. Doesn't matter if you serve 20 or 50 or 100 or 3 people. What matters is how are their lives different today than they were yesterday. Now, I want to end with a bit of a thought process here about some trends. And I want to give you essentially 3 kind of key trends that we're seeing right now in philanthropy. And to start this, I just need to give you a kind of a visual, a continuum, if you will, where on this side of the continuum, we're talking about retail philanthropy. And on this side of the continuum, we're talking about strategic philanthropy. Now look, everybody who ever wrote you a $10 check thinks of themselves as a philanthropist. All right? They're pretty sure they are giving back. They're doing important work in the community. But on that end of the continuum, that is retail philanthropy. That's me responding to a campaign, responding to your personal ask, showing up at an event, going because she told me to go, right? She's my friend, she's going, she said, come on, you gotta come along. There's a silent auction there, right? She's getting me to come so that we can all be in a room together, and then the people who put the event on can use an output measure to go, look, 300 people showed up for our event. But the outcome would be, how much did they invest? What did they put into the mission? What did they commit to doing beyond their wallet with their head and their heart? Are they going to be a part of what goes on here? So across this continuum, then we move to strategy on the other end, and on the other end, strategy is investment. It's me investing in you for the outcomes you produce, not me giving you money to do something I want you to do. Let me say that again. Don't take money from people who want you to do something they want you to do. That's not the same thing. I should be investing in your outcomes. When you do X, Y happens. So if I invest money in that and I can make more Y, that would be a good thing. I'm investing in you for what you do, not for what I want you to do. On the strategic side, people have to grow into that. So the retail side is all give and take, campaign, transaction. On the other side is people thinking more deeply about what do we need to do in this community to make things work? Could I make an investment for you to work with other organizations in a partnership that drove outcomes that we could measure? That's called a theory of change, by the way. When we do X, Y happens. That's a theory of change. And there are only 3 ways to validate a theory of change. It's either academically validated. That means there's lots of studies and papers. I can go on Google and look up all the research that's been done that when we do X, Y happens. That's an academically valid theory of change. There's a model theory of change. You've been doing this for 10 years, and every time you do X, Y happens. And you might actually have some impact data with regression measures. So you can say, when we do X, Y happens. Our model, we do it, always has, always will. And then there's the steal the model measure, right? That's where you go to another city, find somebody who's doing X where Y happens, and you go, and you steal it and take it home. Now, the only issue with stolen models is that it won't work in your city the same way it works in their city, right? Because politics is different, funding is different, even clients and partnerships are different. But if you can buff that model up then you have the ability to actually put it in place, and you can begin that process by using the measures where it came from. You can say, we took a model where when X happens, Y happens, and now we're going to implement it here with the adjustments and changes necessary for it to work here. Here are 3 trends that are critical right now. Everybody needs a theory of change. It doesn't have to be a deep academic theory of change, but you need to be able to tell people, when you do X, Y happens, and here's the validation for that. Not just that you dreamed it up in the room last night, and now you're going to go try to do it. Because when you're small, and you don't have a lot of capability or capacity to grow large, then what gets people to invest in you is your theory of change. So you show me that when you do X, Y happens, or all over America, when people do X, Y happens, and now I have something to invest in that doesn't really match just who you are, how many people work for you, how big is your area. Now I've got something to invest in, and it's an investment because I'm not funding you to do some program. I'm investing in you to get the outcomes that I know you can get. So the trend right now is to not do away with strategic planning, but to not be so focused on planning and be more focused on strategy with a theory of change. So I think you probably all have been through way more strategic plans than you ever wanted to do in your life, and you probably know that they almost never work out right. In fact, if you had done a strategic plan in December of 2019, getting ready for the new year, it would be on a shelf today with lots of dust, and you would never have looked at it again. And so the trend right now is to think in terms of strategy. And what people do a lot now is focus on 1,000-day strategies. That's 3 years. So if I just looked ahead and came together with all of our folks and we decided, what are we going to do? What are the outcomes we're trying to accomplish? What's our theory of change? And then what do we want to accomplish over the next 1,000 days? That would give me plenty of room to pivot. I could speed things up or slow things down. You can't do that in a plan, because plans have metrics connected to them that as soon as you miss the first metric, your plan is over. Then you have to redo it. And since most strategic plans can take the better part of a fiscal year to do, that's a lot of time wasted to create a document that a pandemic could destroy in a month, right? Strategy, on the other hand, you can constantly pivot and change. You can decide what to do. So that's one trend. The second trend is the ability to engage people in communities around the outcomes you're trying to drive, not around the problem you're trying to solve. Let me say that again. Engage people in the outcomes you're trying to drive, not the problem you're trying to solve. When you turn your mission into a problem, half the people don't understand the problem because they don't have it and they don't know what it is. The other half of the people think you're spending too much to solve the problem. It can't be that difficult. And then there's another half, because there's always 150% you can't keep up with. There's another half that thinks that you ought to be doing it faster, better, cheaper, smarter. Or maybe you don't need to be here at all. And so rather than make the focus of your investors' time, energy, and money a problem, make it outcomes that you're trying to drive. I don't want to be academic here, but the work that you work in is not problem area work. The stuff that you do is about dilemmas. A problem is a binary issue, right? If I got a problem and I know what the solution is, then when I do this, the problem's solved. We're done. There's nothing you work in that's that easy to fix. So dilemmas are things that are complex, they take a long time, and there are lots of unintended consequences, right? So now we do X and Y happens, but oh my gosh, Z is happening too, and we didn't even plan on that, and we didn't want that to happen. So your work, ladies and gentlemen, is a practice. It's not a discipline. Stop talking to people like you're nuclear scientists. Your work is a practice. Look, doctors and lawyers call their businesses practices. Do you know why? Because to be successful as a doctor or a lawyer, you have to fail your way to success. Now, they don't talk about this much out loud. But if you were going in for brain surgery tomorrow, you wouldn't want the top person who just graduated from Stanford University to come do your brain surgery. You want somebody who's been doing it for a while, and you wouldn't probably say this out loud, but you'd like to know that maybe they'd failed a few times, just not on you. Because you only learn how to do things well by practicing and failing your way to success. So if we can get theories of change, if we can engage people to go with us on the bus to solve the dilemmas that we're working on, and if we can talk to people about the work itself, it's a practice, not a discipline. There's a lot of work to do in a space to get to an outcome that we all agree is good. If you get those two things solved, you get rid of the overhead myth. You all know what the overhead myth is. That's where everyone thinks you're spending way too much money on overhead. Way too much money. I typically, when I do presentations with slide decks, will share Apple's last quarter financials, because Apple's last quarter financials have 76% expense for overhead. You want to sell your Apple stock? Not likely. That's what it costs. You got to hire smart people, and you have to do innovative things to generate technology that sells. You're in the same business. You have to do complicated things in order to get to what you're trying to get to. That's what it costs. It's not like, oh my God, it should only cost 25% of this. So if that's what it costs, then all you have to validate to the people you're talking to is the life changes you're creating, and this is what it costs to do it. And if it's not that valuable to you, then thanks for coming by. Right? So at some level, applying for grants that have all kinds of administrative requirements in them, doing the 40-page application for a $5,000 gift from some foundation, at some point, the expense of that money is too much for the work you're doing. Even with current day interest rates, it'd be cheaper to borrow the money than it would to put all that human time and capital into doing the work that it takes to do it. So being selective about looking at people as investors in your mission who bring a head, a heart, and a wallet, and not just are going to write a check today and maybe won't next month, and getting people to think about coming along with you on a ride to solve a complex social issue that if it was easy, it would have been solved already. And if it was easy, and I have said this to investors, if it was easy, you would have done it. One last trend to kind of wrap these three together would be the trend that is giving in general. Now, look, on this retail side, things are beginning to rebound. You may know that during the pandemic, we saw a decline. Last year, we saw an unexpected decline in mid-level giving. Mid-level giving is mostly millennial families who began to stop giving at the retail level as much. Now, some of that's economic, some of it's job security, some of it's just fear, right? I'm not sure. I may need the money, so I'm not going to give it. Most of that is rebounding this year, and next year looks like there'll be an increase. But you need to have only a foot in retail giving. There's nothing wrong with it. It needs to be a part of your portfolio. But begin to create investor class people who think about what you're doing. You invest in me, I create outcomes, the return on your investment is for the community. You may not have ever thought about this, but the most productive way to generate investors is to talk to them about giving back to their community through your mission. Otherwise, you're creating a competition. And retail givers love competition, right? They're the ones who will say to you, oh, I know, but my son has autism, and I'm really giving a lot of money to autism right now. And what you're doing is really important, but it can't possibly be as important as autism, right? So when retail givers have to compete, when they think they only have a limited amount of money and they're going to give it to you only when you're more important than something else, you've already missed the investment boat. The investment boat is we all need to be investing in our community. And if you do it through our mission, you can take advantage and credit for outcomes that drive other things in the community that are positive. Thus, you become part of a larger community entity and not just a standalone nonprofit in the trench trying to solve a set of problems for one part of the population that people don't know, don't understand, or haven't seen. Does that make sense? I hope you have a terrific time here today, and I hope you gather lots of great knowledge and take it back and do great things with it. And on behalf of all of us in Central Florida, thanks for being here today and being a part of this.